Hello and welcome to another episode of The Identity Navigator. I am Rohit, and this is a podcast where we make sense of digital security, corporate culture, leadership, and IAM. Whether you are new to all of this or you have been around the block, we have got you covered with deep dives, insights, trends, and practical tips to keep your system secure. So kick back, relax, and let's figure this out together. Today, let's deep dive into something that every IAM initiative will assume as a prereq or prerequisite, mostly done in silo and is rarely accurate. We are talking about the process of discovering, analyzing, and optimizing access to digital resources, also known as resource mining. In the context of IAM, resource mining refers to the process of discovering, cataloging, and analyzing resources within an organization's environment to understand their structure, permissions, ownership, and access controls. The goal is often to gain visibility into the resources like applications, servers, databases, files, or cloud infrastructure, their associated identities, and usage pattern, enabling effective governance, security, and compliance. Right? So, you all have seen this in some way, shape, or form, but you would have seen it, or you might have seen it in a very point solution. And today we are looking at it from a strategic point of view. But before we do that, let's understand as to why resource mining matters. Like everything else, there is security because this mitigates risk by eliminating excessive permissions and identifying misconfigured resources. There is a compliance part to it which streamlines audit by mapping resources to regulatory requirements. Obviously, decommissioning unused resources to reduce cloud spending will result in cost efficiency. And then automating access management with data driven insights will also result in operational agility. So, what are the key components of resource mining in IAM? Well, there are six of them. The first is resource discovery. So, scanning the environment to identify resources, including both active and inactive ones, across on premise and cloud infrastructure. This helps uncover shadow IT or orphan resources. Now, what is shadow IT? Shadow IT can be defined as a resources or systems unknown to IT teams. You can use automated scanners, cloud native services like AWS Config, Azure Resource Graph, or third party solutions like SSPM, CSPM, or ITDR solutions to carry out this resource discovery, especially in a cloud environment. The second key component is permission analysis, understanding which users, roles, or service accounts have access to each resource, analyzing permissions to detect overprivileged access or potential violation of the principle of LPA or least privileged access. You can also detect resources with overly broad access, like over permissioned resources, example across public S3 buckets or global admin roles. You could flag inactive or orphaned account or resources to reduce attack surface, and you can ensure resource adherence to policies like GDPR or HIPAA so compliance is in check. The third key component is access pattern recognition, where you are examining access patterns, group membership, and role hierarchies. You are analyzing logs to identify which resources are frequently accessed and by whom. And you are also spotting unusual access patterns, also called as anomaly detection, example of hours login or geographical anomalies or impossible travel. The fourth key component is role engineering, in which you are optimizing the roles in terms of grouping resources with similar access requirements to define least privileged roles. And predictive provisioning, where you are using machine learning to predict resource access needs based on users' rules or behavior. The fifth key component is classification, where you are categorizing resources based on sensitivity, criticality, or business context, which helps prioritize protection and compliance efforts. Example, securing sensitive data or regulated resources. The sixth and the last key component is the governance part, where you are defining policies and workflows for managing discovered resources and their permissions, and enforcing compliance with organizational policies and regulatory requirements. So, let's take an example workflow to understand it a little bit better, right? And we will take an example which is a core use case of any ITDR or IT threat detection and response solution. And I'm specifically taking this because this is like an hot new domain or fad, whatever you want to call it, in the IM today, right? So an example workflow of resource mining for AWS resources would be discover using AWS Resource Explorer or any ITDR solution to inventory all cloud resources. And then you analyze, run a script to compare resource permission against IAM policies. Then you optimize and then you monitor, right? So an example workflow would be discover, analyze, optimize, and monitor. And there are multiple tools that obviously you can use. So you could use cloud providers like AWS IAM Analyzer, Azure Policies, or GCP Asset Inventory. You could use third-party solutions like Varonis or Tenable.io, CrowdStrike, Horizon. There are too many of them today. And then you can also use open source solution like Cloud Mapper and Scout Suite, to name a few. Now, the outcome would be that resource mining transforms raw resource data into actionable intelligence, enabling organizations to enforce least privilege, reduce risk, and maintain compliance in dynamic IT environments. Another dimension of resource mining is often overlooked. While it is great to assign users to roles and groups, request access packages, and manage approvals, a critical question remains: how do you determine what a specific group actually grants access to, or whether users have direct access to specific resources, or even what access user X truly has? Surprisingly, this capability is rarely included as a part of an IAM platform, which leaves a significant gap in visibility and management. Right. Some of the other use cases are like cloud IAM, mining resources in cloud environments that we just saw an example workflow for, or privilege management, where you are identifying high value resources and ensuring proper management of privileged accounts. Mining is often talked about in terms of role mining, so role optimization, in which you are analyzing existing permissions to create RBAC, is also another use case, right? So this is visibility across the environment and in a very strategic manner of what you want visibility to, right? It is not based upon the technical capability of, hey, I have an ITDR solution that can give you visibility in your cloud environment, your GCP, right? No, that's not it. That's a point solution that solves one problem, but that's not resource mining across your enterprise. Or it could be something like a bloodhound, which could only be done for Active Directory. That's not resource mining, that's a part of resource mining. It could also be, hey, I have this CyberArk solution that can, you know, identify your Active Directory based privileged accounts or service accounts. That is again a point solution, and it's a part of resource mining. What we are trying to understand here is resource mining is a strategic prereq to any mature IAM implementation. Right. So, what would a resource mining process typically look like? So, I would say it should include around five phases. The phase one would be the discovery, where you inventory your resources like applications and infrastructure, database, APIs, services, etc. And this includes locating both structured, like example databases, and unstructured, like say shared folders or SaaS applications. Discovery tools often integrate with cloud environments, on premise infrastructure, and endpoints to find hidden or undocumented resources, right? So, in your phase one, you can use these discovery tools across your cloud, on premise, endpoint, infrastructure to find these hidden or undocumented resources. The second step would be resource categorization, or second phase would be resource categorization, in which you are classifying resource based upon sensitivity or business impact and ownership. So categories often includes critical systems like ERP or financial systems, data repositories like databases and file shares, your cloud services like S3 or blob storage, your legacy applications and infrastructure. And on specifically on this one, focus on crown jewels or high value resources with sensitive data, right? Permission and access mapping. Uh, this would be the third phase where you are analyzing who has access, how they gained access, and what action they can perform. So your map permissions across users, which are both human and non-human, roles and groups. You also look at your federated identities and your service accounts for also for app to app communication, right? Uh, then in the fourth phase, you could have anomaly detection, where you are using analytics and AI to identify over provisioned or unused permission. You can also look into something like a dormant admin account. You are detecting risky behaviors like wide open permissions or public facing cloud storage. And you can flag orphan account as a part of this. Orphan accounts are basically the accounts or resources with no clear owner. And then in the next and the last phase, you can look into remediation and optimization, where based upon findings, you are taking corrective actions like revoking excessive permissions, assigning proper ownership to resources, enforcing the principle of least privilege, and automated IAM workflows like automated approvals for role based access, right? Uh, what would be some of the tools for resource mining in IAM? Now, understand that we are looking at it from an enterprise perspective as an IAM strategic pillar, right? So, I'm going to talk about it in a wider sense. So, CyberArk identity security, right? That gives you comprehensive visibility into privileged accounts and their access to resources. You can use something like a SailPoint Identity Now, which is a cloud based platform for identity governance, right? Uh, you could discover resources and analyzes entitlements and access risk, and certifications could be made better or periodic reviews. You can use Savient Enterprise Identity Cloud, very similar to SailPoint Identity Now, advanced integration with on-premise, hybrid, and cloud resources, your SOD and reporting capabilities. You could use something like a Beyond Trust privileged access management for automated discovery of privileged resources as credentials. So uh, this is for all for enterprise IAM, right? These are enterprise IAM solutions. Again, I'm not uh, endorsing or condoning one over the other. I'm just saying that these are some of the tools that you have out there for enterprise IAM solutions. Now, for your cloud specific resource mining, you could use something like an AWS IAM Access Analyzer. You could use Azure Purview. You could also use a Google Cloud IAM Recommender, depending on your in what is the cloud solution or the cloud service provider that is being used at your enterprise. For infrastructure monitoring and security tools, you could use something like a Splunk or Elk Stack, which is used for monitoring and logging access activities. And you could also do it to visualize access trends and detect anomalies in a resource use. You could use a Varonis DAT advantage, which is specialized in file system resource mining. It can track data access, permissions, and sensitive file movement. You could use a Qualys asset view, discovers resource across hybrid IT environments, and this can offer insights into resource misconfigurations and vulnerabilities. We already spoke about uh, ITDR solutions that are out there. We are also going to talk about some of the other tools, right? So there is no one tool that's going to solve all of the problems. For each of the resources that you have identified, it could be a mix of enterprise IAM solutions, the cloud specific resource mining tool, your infrastructure monitoring tool, or your security tools, or some of the point solutions like a CSPM and SSPM and ITDR, or some of the other security tools like Bloodhounds that are out there. Additional IAM oriented tools could be like identity federation platform like Okta or Ping Identity, uh, cloud security posture management like Prisma Cloud or Dome9, right? So these add cloud specific resource security. Now, what would be some of the techniques for effective resource mining? Uh, so let's look into at least five of them. The first one would be API integration, in which you are using APIs provided by IAM solutions like AWS IAM or Azure AD Graph API to automate discovery and analysis of resources. So you could technically build a script to list all users and their access levels across all of your S3 buckets. You could also use role mining with analytics, right? We have already spoken about it a lot in some of the previous episodes, where you are using machine learning or predefined algorithms to analyze access logs and building optimized rules based upon real usage pattern. Right. So if a user is consistently accessing a subset of resource, propose a new rule encapsulating those permissions. And this also is a part of predictive rule mining that we carry out. You could look into cross environment federation, where you are consolidating resource mining across hybrid environments, on prem and cloud typically, or multiple cloud solutions using federated identities. And tools like Ping Federate can help unify resource analysis across multiple identity providers. Some of the other techniques are permission drift detection, in which you are continually comparing current permissions with baseline access policies to detect deviations. Right, so you can use an IAM rule validation tools to flag any changes that increases risk, and you can use behavioral anomaly detection, like leveraging user and entity behavior analytics (UEBA) to detect unusual patterns in access and resource usage. So an example would be alert. If a non-admin user suddenly accesses high-value resources, an alert could be generated. Best practices for resource mining would be prioritizing critical resources, right? We spoke about crown jewels. So focus on high value or high risk systems, such as databases with sensitive data or financial data or admin portals. Automate wherever possible. Needless to say, automate repetitive tasks like permission analysis, anomaly detection, and reporting to save time and reduce errors. Align with compliance requirements. So map resource mining efforts to framework like NIST or GDPR or CCPA, which is California Privacy Act, HIPAA, to ensure regulatory compliance. You should also carry out periodic reviews, and as everything else in IAM, across department collaboration is absolutely required. So work with stakeholders like application owners and security teams and compliance officers to ensure accuracy in resource categorization. Some of the advanced use cases of resource mining would be least privileged enforcement, where you are discovering resources where excessive permissions violate corporate policies. Your zero trust security, where you are ensuring all resource permissions align with zero trust model of verify every request. Incident response, where you are using resource mining to investigate compromised accounts or insider threats. So let's look at it in the context of a few initiatives, right? So we all now understand what resource mining truly is, and how can it move beyond a point solution to something which is foundational to any IAM strategy. So let's look at resource mining strategy for a zero trust implementation. Right? Most of the organizations today are in some way, shape, or form either looking at or are implementing zero trust. Right? Implementing zero trust requires granular visibility into resources, identities, and access patterns. And resource mining serves as the foundation for this strategy by enabling organizations to discover, analyze, and govern resources while ensuring secure access based upon the never trust, always verify principle. So here is a step-by-step resource mining strategy tailored to a zero trust architecture. First of all, what we have to do is define objective and scope. So objective could be something like gain complete visibility of resources and their access permissions, identify access anomalies and over provisioned identity, and enforce least privileged and micro segmentation policies. You can actually copy paste them, these objectives, right? Because I believe these are good objectives to start with, especially for your resource mining strategy for any zero trust architecture. A scope, you have to define the scope. You could have resources like cloud and on-premise and SaaS and databases and infrastructure, so pick and choose. And you have to define identities like human users and service accounts and keys and devices, APIs and workloads, right? uh, look into human, type of humans, and then non-human identity management, and what would you like to have there in scope. The second phase in that zero trust would be a discovery phase, where you are inventorying resources and identify identities. So for cloud, you can use things like AWS Resource Explorer or Azure Resource Graph or GCP Asset Inventory. For on-premise, you can use tools like CyberArk or Varonis to scan servers, file shares, and applications. We can also integrate with CASB, which is Cloud Access Security Focus, to discover applications like Office 365 or Salesforce or basically any SaaS app. And we can have data stores where we can identify structured and unstructured data repositories like SQL databases, S3 buckets, or shared drives. Then we move into identities, where we map all identities associated with these resources, like your users, which are employees, contractors, or any other type of users in your org, like partners or then you can have devices like managed and bring your own device or choose your own device, applications, service accounts, APIs, and then third parties, vendors, partners. Then ownership and sensitivity. So assign ownership for each resource, right? To classify resource by sensitivity, like critical, so your PII, PHI, financial data, HIPAA, whatever, right? Then moderate could be for internal only data, and low for public facing systems. The next phase would be permission and access analyzing phase or analysis phase, where you are mapping access policies and entitlements for each resource to who has access, what type of access, and how was access granted. So, something like how was access granted could be in one of the three categories, like directly or via group membership or via inherited rules. Next is in permissions and access analysis phase, you have to identify excessive permissions, and then you also have to implement behavior analytics. The next step in the zero trust journey for you would be gap analysis and risk prioritization, where you detect misconfigurations and risk, right? So your misaligned access policies, your shared credentials, your shadow IT and undocumented resources, and then your risk prioritization, where you are using a risk based model to prioritize remediation. And then you have to enforce zero trust policies in terms of least privileged enforcement, your dynamic access controls, where you are using conditional access policies to require MFA for sensitive resource, right? Or allow access only from trusted device or locations. Micro segmentation. But before we get to micro segmentation, let's go back to dynamic access control. So these control conditional access policies, think of it from an intra ID point of view. This could be your conditional access policies configured there, or if you have a solution like a Zscaler, you can configure conditional policies there. Mostly there is a combination of these two, so that is how you create your conditional access policies. Right? And then in your enforcing of zero trust policies, next is micro segmentation, where you are segregating resources into small secure zones. For example, separate production and non-production environments. You could use network segmentation tools like VMware NX, Illumio, or cloud native micro segmentation. There are many tools out there, but micro segmentation is something that you would have to look at. Continuous monitoring and improvement is the next in this journey, where you are doing ongoing discovery. You are doing real-time monitoring using a same solution like Splunk or Logarithm, and you have something like a CSPM, which is cloud security posture management, to ensure cloud compliance in real time. But there also have to be detective controls in place, where you are using access reviews, so conducting periodic access reviews to validate permissions, right? So and this is where IGA tools like SailPoint or Savient comes into picture. You also have your incident response defined, where you are implementing automated workflows to revoke access during a security event, right? So talk to your insider threat team, and how do they integrate with SOAR platform like Palo Alto Cortex or Splunk Phantom. So there would be multiple tools that you would need to operationalize that strategy, right? And that is why I'm saying that don't think of it from a point solution point of view, think of it from a strategy point of view. So you could have something like from an IAM platform point of view, you could have a CyberArk and a SailPoint. From a cloud native tools point of view, you could have, out of the box AWS IAM access analyzer. From a zero trust enabler, and for conditional access policies, you could have something like an Okta or Ping identity or Entra ID. You could also have an Illumio or Zscaler for micro segmentation and secure network access. And then for compliance and reporting tools, you could have Varonis or a Netrix auditor, right, to map sensitive data and generate audit ready reports. There would be multiple tools, but they all would be used to operationalize this zero trust strategy for resource mining. So, example workflow for resource mining in zero trust, if we look at all of this together, you have your discovery, you have your permission mapping, you have your risk detection, your remediation, your continuous monitoring, and and your enforcement. So, key takeaways is continuously identifying resources and their access policies, reducing risks through least privileged enforcement, and maintaining compliance and security through continuous monitoring and dynamic controls, think conditional access policies. So I hope it clarified a little bit, but let's look into something else, right? Because zero trust is very common use case, ITDR is very common use case, and cloud is very common use case, right? So we have been looking at things that comes naturally to us. So let's look into something for or something which is like resource mining strategy for active directory environments. How this strategy translates for your AD, right? Now, needless to say, AD environment form the backbone of many enterprise IT infrastructure, and crafting a resource mining strategy for AD focuses on discovering resources. So resource could be in AD universe, your users and groups and GPOs and computers, etc. Mapping access controls, identifying misconfigurations, and enforcing security policies. So let's look at a step-by-step strategy for resource mining in an AD environment. And this could be an entirely separate episode as well. So I'll try to not make this episode super large, but I'm happy to go in more details. Let me know if you want me to deep dive into this, and we can create another episode for this. But uh, for a step-by-step strategy for resource mining for Active Directory, first of all, obviously, you will define goals and your objectives, right? So it would be like gain visibility into AD objects and identify stale or misconfigured objects and detect security risks such as overly permissive access or privileged escalation paths and strengthen access controls by enforcing the privilege of least privilege principle of least privilege, my apologies. And then in second phase you would get into the discovery phase, in which you are inventorying AD resources. So the first step is identify all resources managed by AD. So you look at all your users, your active, disabled, expired, logged out, and orphan accounts, and identify users with admin privileges like domain admins or enterprise admins, etc. For this, you could use PowerShell, quick, easy, free, get AD user command, or you can use a third party like an AD Manager Plus or a Quest Active Administrator. The next step in the discovery phase is look at groups, right? So security groups and distribution groups, nested groups, and look at their membership hierarchy. You flag anomalies like empty groups, groups with no owners, and overprivileged groups like everyone or domain users. Again, you can use PowerShell, quick, easy, free. Third is you can look into computers. So identify computer accounts, your active accounts, and stale accounts, systems with expired trust relationships. And again, PowerShell, get AD computer, dash filter. Next, you look at group policy objects. So inventory all GPO and their links to OUs, identify misconfigured or unused GPOs, and detect risky settings like unrestricted RDP or lax password policies. Yeah, next, you look into service accounts. So identify all service accounts like application credentials and detects accounts with hard coded passwords where passwords are never expiring or anyone with excessive privileges. Next, you look at permission and access mapping. So identify who can do what with critical AD objects, right? And for this, the tool that I have found most useful is Bloodhound. which is used to map permissions and privileged escalation paths. You can also detect delegated permissions that bypass direct controls, example, right owner on sensitive objects. Next, for permission and access mapping, you look into shared resources where you discover shared folders, principals, and other resources which are tied to your Active Directory, and use tools to analyze permissions like Netrix Auditor or PowerShell. So we can use these tools to analyze permissions on shared resources. Next is your privileged accounts. So identify accounts with elevated privileges, your domain admins, your enterprise admins, your schema admins, and service accounts, specifically service accounts with delegated permissions. Next step is you identify findings and detect risk. So you detect and address tail accounts both for users and computers, orphan accounts, overlapping or duplicate roles and groups. As I'm talking through this is also sometimes use case for AD cleanup. So you can actually pick all of this information up and create a project out of it for Active Directory cleanup. For analyzing findings, next is you look at access risks where you are over permissioning access. So everyone or authenticated users having broad permissions. Look into your GPOs with misconfigurations or weak password policies, excessive RDP access, or a script with hard coded credentials. And then for privileged escalation, we spoke about Bloodhound. Ping Castle is another tool that I've found useful to find privileged escalation paths. For example, a user with permission to modify a GPO linked to a sensitive OU would be an example of a privileged escalation path. Next up would be remediation and optimization. So cleanup of stale objects, enforcing least privileged, harden policies, and service accounts management. So once you have cleaned this up, you would want to get into ongoing monitoring and governance. So you could use tools for continuous monitoring. You can use tools like Azure AD Identity Protection for hybrid setups, or Netrix Auditor for AD change tracking, or Event Viewer or SIEM tools like Splunk or Sentinel for real-time alerts. You definitely use your IGA tools to schedule access reviews, and then compliance audits where you are mapping AD security to compliance framework like NIST or ISO 27001, or generate audit ready reports using tools like AD Audit Plus or Quest Enterprise Reporter. So tools that we spoke about for this one, resource mining and Active Directory. So Microsoft native tools like PowerShell, very powerful. You could use something like an Active Directory Administration Center, so which is a GUI based management tool. You could use Group Policy Management Console for managing GPOs. Uh, can use Bloodhound for mapping attack paths. Can use Ping Castle for auditing and generating a security score for AD environment. And then obviously there are third-party tools like Netrix Auditor, Quest Active Administrator, and AD Audit Plus. So, what would an example resource mining workflow look like? Objective, discovery, analysis, remediation, monitoring. Right? So, key takeaway is a robust resource mining strategy for AD enables visibility, reduce risks, and aligns with zero trust principle. Right. So, as a part of your zero trust strategy, you could have this AD cleanup or resource mining for AD as a part of that program, right? Because not very often you will get a chance to carry this out, but once it gets ties back into a strategic initiative like zero trust, you would have that much more buy-in with the stakeholders. So by combining native tools, third-party solutions, and best practices, you can secure your AD environment and ensure efficient access management. Uh, the biggest challenge that I have seen with most of the implementations that I have come across is we are looking at very point solution like, hey, let's get Bloodhound in and we will do this, right? But there has to be a larger vision around resource mining across AD and cleanup across AD, and that is what should dictate your tool rather than the other way around, right? So your business should drive technology and not the other way around. So we have looked into two or three use cases so far. We have looked into cloud use case, we have looked into zero trust, and we have looked into Active Directory. There is another example that I wanted to talk about so that we all absolutely understand this concept, right? And this is where I will talk about applications, so your actual business applications and your AD integration, right? So, and this is where I found that legacy AD systems, which are like 20 years old or 30 years old, have so much unknowns in them, and I'm sure you would relate to me, right? So let's look into that. So to determine which Active Directory group is associated with which enterprise application, we need to analyze the application's integration with AD. This involves understanding how the application uses groups for access control, like role assignment, permissions, or policies. So how do you achieve that? How do you identify which AD group is associated with which application? So to understand application in the AD integration, uh, most enterprise applications integrated with AD use groups for role-based access control, assigning users to roles based on group membership or authorization, or for policy enforcement. So you can start by documenting the integration method for each application. Is it using LDAP queries? Does it authenticate via SAML or OIDC with Azure AD or an on-premise ADFS? Does it pull groups via SCIM or a custom API? So document this integration method for each application. Now, second is native tools and queries to identify group application association. So check group description and notes. So admins often document group purposes in the description or note fields. So you can use PowerShell to retrieve group details, right? And then you can uh, look into those group description or nodes. You can write simple scripts to identify if an application name is referenced over there. You can also inspect group membership, where you are looking for users or service accounts linked to a specific application. So the point of all of this is we don't want to just offload the work to application owners saying that, hey, there are 200 applications and you are connecting to my Active Directory, tell me all the groups that are being used, because I can guarantee that many of the groups would be used for more than one application, right? But you don't want to offload all of this work to them, so we should have done our homework, and this homework that we are carrying out is based upon the group's description and notes and looking at group membership, and that will give you a fair idea of which application is associated with which AD group. And you can also audit application specific OUs. So many organizations place application specific groups in dedicated OUs. So there are a lot of ways in which you can slice and dice the data available to you within your Active Directory or in your CMDB system. That should give you a fair idea of which group is associated with which application. So then it would be, there would be 30% unknowns that you would ask application owners, and then you would then also ask them to verify rather than create it from scratch. You could also look into application specific configuration, where you are checking application admin portals, and many enterprise applications allows you to view the AD groups configured for permission or roles. Example, for a Microsoft 365, groups are directly visible in the Azure AD Enterprise Applications Blade, or for ServiceNow, roles and permissions are often mapped to AD groups in the user provisioning module, or for Salesforce, check the SAML or JIT group mapping in the admin settings. So many of the application admin portals will give you a fair idea. And you can also use Azure AD Enterprise Applications, if obviously if you're using Azure AD or Entra ID. So you can navigate to Azure AD Enterprise Application, check the name of your application and check users and groups. And this will list all groups and users assigned to that application. Logs, always you can use your application logs and AD logs for cross referencing. So you could look into this logs. You can write scripts over your SIEM solution to correlate logs with application access, right? uh, just a side note, so configuring events like as 4728, which is group membership added, or 4732, which is member added to security enable groups. So you would have codes like this in your logs. There is a lot of information there that will give you a fair idea. So look into your application logs and look into your AD logs. You can then do PowerShell for automation. You can find group membership of service accounts. You can list group assigned to specific users, but it will only get you so far, right? And then you can use third party tools like a Netrix auditor, which tracks group assignments and provide reports on application specific group usage. You can use Quest active roles, which is simplifies group membership querying, group membership and application association. You can use Veronis Stat Advantage, which maps AD groups to specific permissions. You can also use Azure AD specific tools, which are like Azure AD Identity Protection or Microsoft Graph API, to query app to group association programmatically. Always can do manual cross referencing, so documenting existing groups using PowerShell or checking permissions in applications or correlating permissions. And then you can use advanced techniques on Bloodhound and SIEM integration, where you are querying logs and writing algorithms on top of it to identify this association. But most importantly, this would need regular maintenance, where you are keeping group descriptions updated for easier identification in the future. More often than not, uh, we define with stop the bleeding, where going forward, every group created should be tied back to an application, and then you start doing cleanup, because 100% of the cleanup is a very ambitious goal. So you identify at least for 60% of the applications, or at least for the crown jewels, you know which groups are tied to those applications, and you continue to uh, identify more and more legacy groups. But going forward, every group created or modified should be associated with an application. So obviously, periodic group membership audit and automate reporting of group membership would help you. So we actually went very technical today, right? By taking a lot of use cases. We discussed about what is resource mining and why it is not a point solution, or there is no one solution. That is why I discussed about so many different tools that will work together to give you that final target state that you want to be in. We spoke about resource mining, what is it, why it is important, why it is a strategic pillar and not a point solution. We spoke about resource mining in cloud, which tied back to your ITDR solutions. We talked about resource mining in zero trust. We talked about zero trust strategy. We talked about resource mining in Active Directory, and then how does Active Directory and application integration uh, be used as an example for this resource mining. So we discussed a lot of very foundational things today, and we went a little bit too technical at some places. I hope you found it useful and are better equipped to deal with the challenges in your organization. As always, thank you for listening. You can reach out to me via LinkedIn, or always can send me an email at theidentitynavigator@gmail.com. Believe me, I go through each of your emails, and thank you so much for the love that you have shown me over the last months and years. Both of this information I will put in the show notes. Until next time, this is Rohit, your identity navigator.